The scene was desolate, an empty parking lot at dusk, with the distant sound of cars in the background and a cold wind blowing across the asphalt. Under a parked car, curled up and trembling, was a skinny, dirty dog with half-closed eyes filled with exhaustion. It was Radish. He had no name, no home, and at that moment, it seemed like he had no hope either. For weeks, he wandered aimlessly, surviving on scraps he found in the trash and the bits of dog food that Julia, an unfamiliar woman, had left for him a few times. But that night, something was different. His body lay still, as if the pain had defeated him. He barely had the strength to crawl, and the faint whimpers escaping his throat were almost inaudible. The reason. A few minutes earlier, a car had passed and hit him, leaving his hind legs completely useless. The impact was brutal. He tried to get up, but the pain was unbearable, forcing him to lie there, utterly vulnerable. When Julia arrived with her bag of dog food, she saw the scene from a distance and felt her heart stop for a moment. No, this can't be, she thought, running toward him. As she got closer, she saw the blood pooled on the ground and his hind legs twisted at impossible angles. The dog, who used to wag his tail when she arrived, now could barely lift his head to look at her. But his eyes said it all: fear, pain, and a silent plea for help. Julia knelt beside him and gently touched his head. "It's okay, I'm here." "You're going to be okay," she said, tears streaming down her face. Radish let out a faint whimper, as if he understood that she was his only chance. She knew she had to act quickly. The dog was in shock and needed urgent care. Julia grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called the nearest veterinary clinic. "I'm bringing in a severely injured dog. He was hit by a car. Please be ready." Without hesitation, she took off her coat and used it to wrap Radish, trying to keep him still and prevent his injuries from worsening. As she lifted him, she realized how light he was, a bundle of bones and fur, barely clinging to life. In the back seat of her car, she kept glancing in the rearview mirror to check if he was still breathing as she drove quickly through the city streets. The silence in the car was unbearable, broken only by the occasional faint whimper from Radish. Julia kept talking to him, as if trying to keep him awake. "Stay with me, okay? I promise I'll help you. Just don't give up on me." With every passing kilometer, her fear grew. Had she gotten there in time? Would he survive such severe injuries? Julia didn't know, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to give up. When she arrived at the veterinary clinic, Julia parked the car haphazardly and rushed inside with Radish in her arms. He was too weak to react, his body limp and his nose warm, a clear sign of fever. As soon as she entered, the receptionists and the on-call veterinarian ran to assist her. "He was hit by a car. He's badly hurt. Please, help him," she pleaded, almost out of breath, her hands trembling as she handed over the dog. Radish was quickly taken to the emergency room. Julia stood in the reception area, hugging herself, unable to hold back her tears. She felt like she was watching his life slip through her fingers. The silence seemed to stretch on forever until, finally, the veterinarian returned with a diagnosis. "The situation is critical. He has multiple fractures in his hind legs, and the impact displaced his femur. He'll need orthopedic surgery to rebuild his legs. Without it, he won't walk again. And worse, he may not survive much longer." The ground seemed to disappear beneath Julia's feet. The surgery had to be done, but the cost was steep. $5,000, not including hospitalization and medication expenses. For her, already living on a tight budget, that amount was nearly impossible to manage. "Is there no other option?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Unfortunately, no. He's still young and has a good chance of recovery with the surgery, but it needs to happen soon. Otherwise, he won't survive the pain and complications." The veterinarian left, leaving Julia alone with her thoughts. The image of Radish, motionless in the back seat of her car, lingered vividly in her mind. She knew giving up wasn't an option. He had survived this far, and now he depended on her for a chance. Wiping her tears, Julia decided to fight. Back home, she picked up her phone and started recording appeal videos. In one of them, she held a photo of Radish, taken at the clinic. Skinny, with sad eyes, but still with a glimmer of hope. "This is Radish. He was hit by a car and is badly injured. The veterinarian said he needs urgent surgery to survive, but I don't have the money to pay for it. Any help, any amount. Please, help me save his life. She shared the video in neighborhood groups, on her social media, and even asked friends and family to spread the message. The response was immediate. People began commenting, sharing, and donating small amounts, $5, $10, $20. Some comments deeply moved her. I can't help much, but I hope these $15 make a difference. Julia, you have a big heart. We'll make this happen. I'll share with my friends. Radish deserves a second chance. The campaign started gaining momentum, but Julia knew she had to do more. Then she had another idea. A raffle. She gathered items from her home, a fan, a coffee maker, even an old watch, and began selling tickets at a symbolic price. In the following days, Julia's routine became exhausting. She worked in the mornings, managed the campaign in the afternoons, and spent her nights at the clinic by Radish's side. With each visit, he seemed a little weaker, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, as if he knew she was doing the impossible to save him. I'll make it, Radish. You're going to get through this. I promise. Over time, the campaign began to bear fruit. Some more generous donors contributed larger amounts, and the raffle tickets started selling out. Even so, the total collected still fell short. A little over $1,000 was missing to cover the cost of the surgery, and time was running out. Then Julia received an unexpected call. A man who had seen Radish's story on social media offered to cover the remaining amount. I saw how hard you're fighting for him. You have a heart of gold, and the world needs more people like you. Tears streamed freely down Julia's face. She could hardly believe it. She finally had enough for the surgery. On the scheduled day, Julia arrived early at the clinic, holding Radish in her arms one last time before handing him over to the medical team. I'll be here waiting for you, she said, kissing his head. He looked into her eyes and, despite the pain, wagged his tail slightly, as if to say he trusted her. The hours that followed were agonizing. Julia could barely sit still, pacing back and forth in the reception area, her hands sweaty and her heart racing. Finally, the veterinarian appeared with a smile on his face. The surgery was a success. Now it's just a matter of time and care for him to recover. Julia broke down in tears of relief. Radish had made it through the first stage of his fight for life, but she knew the work was just beginning. On the day of the surgery, Julia woke up early but could barely eat or focus on anything. All she could think about was Radish and how much he needed to survive. On the way to the clinic, he lay in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket. Despite being weak, he tried to lift his head when he heard her voice. Julia looked at him through the rearview mirror and said, tears welling in her eyes, "Hold on, my love. Just a little longer. I promise you'll be okay." At the clinic, as the medical team prepared for the surgery, Julia had a chance to say goodbye. She knelt beside him, gently stroking his head. "You're strong, Radish. I know you are. We've made it this far, and now there's just one more step. I'll be here when you wake up. I promise." Radish, even in his frail state, looked at her with deep, grateful eyes, as if he understood every word. When he was taken to the operating room, Julia felt an immense void. It was as if a piece of her had been torn away. The hours that followed felt endless. She paced back and forth in the waiting room, wringing her hands and battling the worst thoughts. Every sound of a door opening made her heart race, but the wait seemed eternal. Finally, the operating room door opened, and the veterinarian appeared with a faint smile. Julia ran to him, her heart pounding with fear of what he might say. "The surgery was a success," the vet said. "The fractures have been repaired, and the femur is back in place. He'll need plenty of care and physical therapy, but he has a good chance of recovery." Julia's legs almost gave out with relief. She started crying right there, thanking the veterinarian and the team for saving Radish's life. When she was allowed to see him, Julia walked into the room and found Radish still groggy from the anesthesia but breathing peacefully. She approached and gently stroked his head, whispering, "I knew you were strong. Now, we'll get through this together." For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. The worst was over, but she knew the journey to recover Radish was just beginning. The first days after the surgery were critical. Radish stayed at the clinic, receiving medication to manage his pain and aid in the recovery of his fractures. Julia visited every single day without fail. She entered the room carefully, always bringing something for him. A toy, a clean blanket, or just her soft voice saying, "Hi, my love, I'm here." Even in his weakened state, Radish began to respond to her presence, his tail attempting a faint wag or letting out a sigh that seemed like relief. When the day came to bring him home, Julia felt both emotional and apprehensive. She knew Radish's recovery would be long and that he would depend entirely on her for a while. With the vet's guidance, she learned how to care for him at home, changing his bandages, administering his medications on time, and most importantly, helping him begin to move again. He was alive, but the road to regaining his strength would be arduous. In the first days at home, Radish could barely stand on his own. Julia improvised a kind of support with a towel, which she wrapped under his body to help him take his first steps. Every movement was a struggle, and he whimpered softly with each attempt. But Julia never gave up. She stayed by his side constantly, encouraging him with words of affection. "Come on, Radish, you can do it. Just one more step," and when he finally managed to take a few steps on his own, she cried tears of joy, hugging him carefully so as not to hurt him. As the weeks went by, Radish began to regain strength. He could stand on his hind legs for short periods, and after much physical therapy, he took his first steady step. It was a milestone. Julia could hardly believe her eyes. "You're doing it, boy. I knew you were strong." She showered him with kisses and tears, while he finally wagged his tail as he never had before. Gradually, he returned to being a lively dog, exploring the yard and even trying to play with the toys she had bought for him. But the most special part wasn't just Radish's physical recovery. It was the deep connection that grew between him and Julia. Every look, every gesture, spoke of the unbreakable bond they had built. Radish was no longer just a rescued dog. He was part of the family. And for Julia, watching him run again was like witnessing a miracle. He had been given a second chance at life, but deep down, she knew he had also transformed her life forever. As the months passed, Radish became a completely different dog from the fragile, vulnerable being Julia had found in the parking lot. Not only had he regained strength in his legs, but he had also rediscovered the joy of living. Each day, Julia was moved to see him running around the yard, playing with the toys she bought for him, or simply lying beside her, resting his head on her legs as if he knew that was where he had always belonged. But for Julia, the most significant transformation wasn't physical, it was emotional. Radish had become the center of her life, and she knew in her heart that he was more than just a dog, he was her great love. Julia often reflected on what had happened between them. "I thought I was rescuing him," she would tell friends and family, "but in truth, he rescued me." In the quiet moments at home, when life felt hard or stressful, all it took was one look at Radish to feel an indescribable comfort. He followed her everywhere, always attentive, as if afraid to lose her. When she cried, he would slowly approach, resting his head on her lap as if to say, "I'm here for you." It was as if he knew that the love she had given him had saved his life, and now he wanted to repay it every second. To Julia, Radish wasn't just a dog in need of care, he was her source of strength. Every morning, when she woke up and found him sleeping by her bed, his tail starting to wag gently at the sight of her, she felt warmth in her heart. "I'll never leave you, my love," she whispered, stroking his head. The connection between them was something words could never describe. It was pure, unconditional love, a bond only those who have truly loved an animal could understand. Today, Julia says without hesitation that Radish changed her perspective on life. He taught her about resilience, about continuing to fight even when everything seems lost. He had every reason in the world to give up, but he never did, she would say. And I wouldn't have had the strength to fight so hard for him if it weren't for that look. That look that told me he still had so much love to give. And indeed, Radish became the perfect reflection of unconditional love. He didn't need words to show that in their lives, pain and challenges had been overcome, replaced by a partnership nothing could destroy. Radish survived because Julia believed in him, even when it seemed impossible. And this story is a powerful reminder that love and empathy can change the fate of those who need it most. How many Radishes are still waiting for someone like Julia? Would you have the courage to do the same?